Hi everyone. In this short little video, I just want to talk about why convergence might not occur. So in the last video, we talked about why convergence would occur, and there my example was the United States and Japan. And if we assume the two countries have exactly the same production function, meaning the same technology, etc., then the only way Japan could have a lower standard of living is if it had a lower capital-labor ratio. But that meant the marginal product of capital, and hence the return to capital, is higher in Japan. So capital would flow towards Japan, and it would be this flow of capital across international boundaries that pushed up the capital-labor ratio in Japan, increased labor productivity until labor productivity in Japan reached that of the United States, and therefore real GDP per capita and the standard of living would catch up to that of the United States. Well, here we're going to do something similar, except we're going to say, let's suppose for the sake of argument that the two countries have different production functions, and we'll choose the United States and Sudan. Okay? Now we're choosing the United States and Sudan because they're two very different countries. We could say Sudan has a different production function for a variety of reasons. It's probably not technology, because technology flows quickly across borders, so if one country has computers, other countries can get computers relatively quickly. But on the other hand, there might be differences in the skill level of the workers due to differences in education. The geography is certainly different in Japan. It's got different governmental and social institutions. All these things could cause differences in the production function. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the Sudan and the United States start off with exactly the same capital-labor ratio. So the United States is up here at point A, and therefore they've got a relatively high level of labor productivity, and the Sudan is down here. Sudan, with a relatively low labor productivity and hence low standard of living. The question is, will Sudan catch up to the United States, much like Japan caught up to the US in the last video? And the answer is going to be no. And all we have to do is work through exactly the same type of reasoning we did before. Let's take a look at the marginal products. So the marginal product of capital is the slope of the production function at the relevant point, so it's relatively steep at the US, but in the Sudan, the slope is relatively flat, so the marginal product of capital in the US is greater than the marginal product of capital, and I'm just going to write S there for Sudan. Alright, well, if that's the case, then that means the rate of return to capital is higher in the US than it is in Sudan. That means capital is going to flow not towards Sudan or not towards the poor country as it did in the previous video, but it's actually going to flow towards the rich country. So as that happens, the U.S. capital-labor ratio is going to rise. And as the U.S. capital-labor ratio rises, you move up along an existing production function, and as that happens, labor productivity in the U.S. increases, and rather than the gap between the rich and the poor country getting smaller, it actually gets larger. And this will all continue until you hit a point like, let's call it point C. And where point C, that is supposed to be a roughly parallel line to what is down here at B. And the standard of living in the U.S. has increased, or labor productivity has, to labor productivity prime, which, since the labor productivity is the key determinant of the standard of real GDP per capita increases, and the gap between the rich and poor increase. And as I said, this keeps on happening until the marginal product of capital in the U.S. falls towards the marginal product of capital in, the Sudan. Alright, so the whole point of this video is to say that, hey, if you have got two countries and they have different production, or they have persistently different levels of the standard of living as measured by real GDP per capita, the only way that can happen is if they have two different production functions, meaning one has a higher production function, in this case the US, and the other poor country has a lower production function, in this case the Sudan. Okay? Well, what are the potential causes of that? Well, as I said, Sudan suffers from poor geography, so maybe it's just never going to have a very strong agricultural sector, and maybe the geography is not conducive to manufacturing sectors, so it's going to be very difficult for it to develop either agriculturally or manufacturing. If it's a relatively poor country that invests relatively little in education, the skill level of the labor forces might be a lot lower in Sudan. And so there's a whole host of things that could explain why the production function is lower in Sudan. The point of this video was just to say that it must be the case that Sudan is on a lower production function for them to have persistently lower levels of labor productivity and hence the standard of living. All right, and this concludes my discussion of the phenomenon of catch-up. Catch-up occurs when two countries have the same production function, and catch-up will not occur when countries have different production functions.